recent statistics show that only 41% of Malaysians get degrees.
Online, if you look at any post that promotes the welfare of refugee, you'll find a lot of hate comments.
Why do you care?
Why do you care?
We have to care for the others so that we build this community moving forward, and it's only through communities you can really push the country forward, improve, right?
Hi, and welcome everyone to another episode of the Discovery Series by TEDxUKM. And for today's episode, we have a very special guest joining us. Please introduce yourself.
So hi everyone, my name is Cyril Joachim, CJ for short. I'm a Tunku scholar from cohort 2022, currently working with Teach for Malaysia and also the founder of Wira-Wira Malaysia. Happy to be here and thank you for this opportunity.
Yay!
Thank you.
Okay, all right. And Chinwei, please introduce yourself.
Oh, me too? Okay. Yeah. So my name is Shinwei. I'm actually from the production team of TEDxUKM, and I'll be joining here as the moderator together.
We have two moderators. Oh my god, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Aisha. Hi. Okay, cool. So today we're diving deep into a topic that affects millions but doesn't always get the spotlight it deserves, which is education inequity. In today's episode, we will uncover what exactly is education inequity, how it happened, and why is it important, and most importantly, our role as a society in this problem. So without further ado, how would you define education inequity in the simplest terms, and how is the situation here like in Malaysia?
So I think in the simplest terms, it's just a child's inability or inaccessibility towards good education. And when I say good education, specifically in terms of like formal schooling, in getting the right methods of education towards them, I think things have become very obsolete lately. But there has been, of course, a lot of progress in terms of development and how we shift the way we teach. But I still think there's a lot of room for improvement, especially ensuring the most vulnerable of these children are able to also achieve the same standards that we set for the rest of society.
And what about education inequality?
Inequality is just aligns with the SDG 10, reducing inequalities, but specifically on education, you can see that there's proof all over the world in the US, the SAT, and for Malaysia, you can see that different areas of different income and so on, you can see that the result isn't that equal. So there's something happening there. So that's the simplest term that you can see.
So, like in Malaysia, are there like any specific areas that are mostly targeted when it comes to education inequalities?
Yep, I think there's a couple. The first I would say is just B40 communities, which means these are likely to be areas that are very rural or further down. And you'd be surprised, I think whenever we talk about rural communities, we often look only towards East Malaysia, which is true. I think they have the biggest disparity in terms of good education and not having good education. But I think a lot of Malaysians get very surprised when they realize that even in Selangor, which is a pretty developed state, we have areas like Klang, which also still don't get proper access to education because of poverty gaps, because of just the fact that infrastructure is not fully there yet in some locations. In Perak as well, we have places like in Greek, which is also very rural and very far away from town centers. And I think this makes it a lot more difficult in trying to ensure kids are, I wouldn't even say bare minimum, but it's still this to get like some levels of education is still a massive difficulty that we're still trying to overcome today.
Right. So in this
Context, would you define education inequality as the situation where certain children still don't have the privilege to go to school, or
Yes. So I would okay. So to an extent, obviously, there's many forms of education today, right? You have things like even soft skill education, which is a lot, which is something that a lot of NGOs are investing into, which is something I think Malaysians should be very proud of. A lot of Malaysian people are very inspired and empowered to start their own non-profits and to ensure that these certain areas are also covered. But when we speak of education inequity, I think it's the core basics. Like in first and foremost, linguistics. A lot of kids are unable to ensure that they can learn simple bahasa that is applicable, let alone English. I think a lot of schools across Malaysia still struggle with basic English. But beyond linguistics, if I may add further, I think because we're a developing country and we're also transitioning into different fields of like tech, science, and everything else, STEM is also a big issue today. We did have a lot of like massive progress reforms, and we still do. But I think because of COVID, right, and how COVID kind of shifted our ways of studying, how schools are implemented, I think there's also a bit of regress to an extent on how these initiatives could be. But I think that's how education inequality looks like in Malaysia right now. Yeah.
Understood. Because I feel like a lot of, especially people who, get education normally, they wouldn't really understand what it means by education inequality. So yeah, I think CJ summed it up quite nicely.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Okay, so next, why does this inequity exist in the first place? Let's discuss.
I'm gonna let you lead this first.
So for education inequity, I mostly focus on the refugees part. So for information, there's a lot of inequalities that happens in this country and in this in our world basically. And I'm specifically interested in the inequality of education for the refugee community. As you know, Malaysia is one of the rare countries that did not ratify the 1951 Refugee Conventions that allow them to have the same rights for education and healthcare, so on. For example, for education, they are not able to attend the government schools. They are not able to attend any formal educations. Well, the alternative may be international schools, but obviously they don't have the financial ability to go for them. So the only solution is just the community education center that they can go to. Therefore, this inequity exists in the first place where the people, they are not aware.
Yeah.
They are not aware that this inequity exists. Because a lot of us, like what Aisha said just now, we all are not really sure what inequity is. If we don't know, how can we help, right? So I would say the biggest why that this inequality exists is because we don't have any big or really progressive policy that we can help to reduce that, and we don't have really formal awareness towards this topic specifically.
That's very fair. I just want to add up a few things. But I think first there needs to be a bit more framing. So the reality of a lot of how things work is that education inequality is something that's very unachievable, because equality means that people need to be from the same background and settings or with the same amount of resources, which is why the shift now is towards education inequity. Because the reality is that even when you try helping different groups of people in different ways of allowing them to uplift themselves, it's still a big question: how do we fully optimize that ability? And I think Aisha says it very correctly. That a lot of people who do have education tend to not have the awareness, because and I know, like, I think for all of us here who are even at UKM and anyone who does degrees, right? We are always in schools or in settings where we realize that
Yep.
all our friends are doing degrees, right? Why is there a thing that people are not getting their degrees? But I think recent statistics show that only 41% of Malaysians get degrees. Which means it's still a minority of Malaysians who end up having tertiary education as a whole. And I think that's the first issue we have to really look upon. What's going wrong? And I'm very happy he brought up refugees here. I think it's true. There's a big struggle for refugee students, which is why there have been different alternatives in terms of non-profits that have recently come up to the scene. There's Fuji, Fuji is an international school. There's also Project Red. They're a non-profit that also helps students have access to extracurriculars and different forms of soft skill. Because if you cannot obtain STEM subjects or English or Bahasa, I think there are a lot of different opportunities that you can maybe get opportunities of getting a life at, right? I think that's in terms of refugees. I think, and the reality that I think I would also want to discuss here is this, that I think the reason why Malaysia didn't even sign on that policy is because we were at no position to sign. I think because a lot of our own people still struggle financially. And signing that means we have now an added obligation by the government. And I think it made sense why we didn't sign it at the time. But I'm so happy that, Malaysians who also recognize these things are doing so much. And I think now we're in a better position to support and assist. So of course, as what he said, I agree, there needs to be some check and reform. But to answer your question, why it exists, I'm going to summarize it into just 3 simple areas. The first is they're likely to be victims of the birth lottery,
Bird lottery.
which means that they're either born poor, born in we don't get to decide where we are born, right? Some of us are born in families that prioritize education, but many others are born in families that cannot prioritize, not because they don't want to, but it's a struggle. If you are to prioritize education, there needs to be maybe extra fees being paid.
Right.
Is schools nearby, right? And all these conversations need to be spoken of. So number one, I think is usually like in terms of victims of birth lottery, you're either maybe from a very poor family, so financial access is a difficulty. I mean, yeah, financially is difficult. Number two is awareness, and I think this is a massive issue that we just don't talk about. There is a big number of parents who don't want their kids going to school.
Oh,
Yes,
really?
it is.
Okay.
It's incredibly interesting when I first read it up. I was like, wow, why is this a thing, right? Like, I mean, we're all Asian parents, right? The first thing your mom and dad's going to be like, go to school, get your straight A's, right? Or get your
Exactly.
university.
Oh.
But a lot of them still don't want to have access to education. So whenever you do a lot of outreach projects, in ensuring that kids have some chance, parents are usually your first opposition.
Oh.
The first question they ask is, why should my child invest the next 5 years in trying to obtain a certificate when my child could maybe become a farmer, could do other things that earns the family money immediately.
I see.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think that shift, Aisha, I think is quite interesting. I mean, initially this would just be like primary sector fields, but because there's been a rise of like online jobs, like the way schemes work, right? You see a lot of M40 people also transitioning and being like, maybe we don't need the degree, we can just get the money faster, you know. So all this also affects education inequity to an extent because there is lack of awareness on the importance of having education. Okay, but the third thing is something I recently recognized myself. I think a lot of children who are invested and interested don't have the correct mentors. When I say mentors, obviously teachers are there to teach and teachers are leaders of the classroom. But when I say mentor, I mean the closest person as a role model figure of who you can look at. Because a lot of the people that is glorified by society are usually going to be your straight A students. But you don't celebrate those who have still achieved that little milestones in life. So if you're a poor person and you maybe it's called like 1A in language, right? Or you just passed all your papers, when you don't celebrate these things is when kids don't know who do I look up to. Because the one you glorify seems so far away.
Yeah.
And I achieve that as well.
They're so demotivated by it, right?
Correct.
Okay, that's
I think
true.
if any of you the viewers here are SPM candidates, because at this point of the podcast, results just came out.
Yes.
Uh,
Congratulations
congrat-
to everyone.
To all of you, yeah. I think you all did well. Of course, straight A is amazing job, but to everyone who achieved, you're doing well. Please carry on with education no matter what.
That's true.
Yeah. So I hope that answers the question of why it exists.
So it's pretty clear that the inequality exists because of a lot of different circumstances, but with raising awareness in hopes to the future that we can create a better future for our children. Yes. All right. So moving on to the next segment. Why bridging the gap matters? So some people might think, oh, this doesn't affect me in any way, so why should I care? So I want to ask you guys here, why does bridging the education gap matters for all of us?
Why do you care?
Why do you care?
Okay, for me, it matters to me that education needs to be formally recognized because by then they can truly fully achieve your full potential. Like without education, you could never explore what you're good at. For example, a guy that he's naturally talented in robotics or whatsoever.
Right.
If he didn't get the formal education, he didn't get the opportunity to do so, to explore so, will he get something and will he learn how to do robotics in the first place? That's a big issue. So we can all say this, right? By statistical inevitability, Albert Einstein is probably not the smartest person alive.
Okay.
Okay. So there might be someone that is living day to day, just spending their energy trying to survive, survive, or they are not reaching their full potential by not going to school and started working and so on. Therefore, I think it's a very big progression for our community if everyone got to fully achieve and learn what they're interested in, and they can really contribute to what building the community. That's why I think it's very important for us to bridge the education gap. What do you think?
So generally, I think there was this very I can't remember who specifically. I'm not sure it was Mandela or it was Gandhi. But holding a pen is like holding a sword. But this doesn't harm anyone. It uplifts people instead. But to answer that question of like why do we actually care? So I think the first general understanding is that education in itself is the foundation of everything else. Like I know we all have different passions, but I think to have some consistency in understanding what the world we live in is like, how the world functions, is why you have formal education, right? And that sets the groundwork. But let's just bring it back to the Malaysian context. Why do we need to care as Malaysian people? And I think we are a developing country that is heavily dependent on natural resources. But when we talk about natural resources, the argument is always like tin ore, petroleum, oil and gas.
Yes.
But one thing we Malaysians forget is that the best natural resource we have is ourselves, right? And how you really transform yourself to be that person that develops the country. And the question here is, why do we have to care about this thing? So Malaysians have two mindsets.
Alright.
Okay, if I may say. The first is the tak kisah attitude, like tidak apa, like I don't care. And the second attitude is we have is that whenever we're upset about something, we blame the government first. It's always like, oh, we just blame the government for almost everything. But we don't realize we are a democratic country, which means the government is us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And to transform things and to allow governments to also optimize what they do, it starts with what we do with ourselves in the core value, right? And that's why the first issue is that the tak kisah attitude kind of just ensures that. So just to break that part is just like, life is short. And you want to do all the things you can in that time, right?
Yes.
And you got to break out of it, and education comes first. So that you realize what are your fields. Because like, I know math, science can be very difficult stuff. But it's through maths and science you realize like, do I like numbers? Do I like experiments? Do I like getting some observation of the world? Language allows you to communicate, right?
Right.
And I think these are just basic foundation. It's not about getting your A's. It's about just trying to grasp how the cultures of humanity functions around you.
I think that's a really good point, actually.
Yep.
You're right. Education shouldn't be about getting straight A's. I think that's like a very wrong mindset that people set on.
Exactly, correct. I
Definitely.
think that's the demotivating factor, is that we should celebrate people who have done well.
Right.
We should. But we shouldn't leave out those who haven't achieved as much. Because the point of education is for you to live your life on this place as much as you can. Right? Which is why like different countries will have different formats of education.
Right.
It is to first build the identity of what you want to be. But yeah, and I think coming to this, like how we transform and why we ought to care, right?
Yeah.
I think whenever we say when we need to give education, is because it's a right to everyone else, right? It shouldn't be like a competitive market. How much can you pay to get education? But I think the bigger question here is, okay, we obviously know it's a right for all, but why do we need everyone to specifically care for even the most vulnerable group of kids, right? Because Malaysian people usually, we all very caring people, but it comes to a point where you feel like, you know what, my finances are already insufficient.
Yeah.
You
feel like I can do more.
I cannot do more. I might as well just like do what I can for myself and for my family, which is great. But the reality is, you can only build an individual so high up at a point where they are either isolated there, and that's why they tend to like move out, travel across, right? But when they come back, they still feel isolated on their own because of a very small group of people who have that ability.
Okay.
And I think that's when the struggle happens. There's a big disparity gap. We have to care for the others so that we build this community moving forward, and it's only through communities you can really push the country forward, improve, right?
Higher standard.
Correct, in the entire standard. Like the Prime Minister alone cannot deal with every single department. You need a cabinet of ministers. And below those ministers, you have people in those departments doing the great work that they do. And what ensures sustainability is, I think, beyond your money, your oil and gas or whatever, it's the human capital and what we can do as Malaysian people for our country.
That's not.
Yeah, so I can also add on to the political views things.
Yeah.
So second thought, even that CJ said just now was like all is the government's fault, right?
Yes.
So there was also one thing that I want to say, which is the convention that I mentioned just now, the 1951 Refugee Convention. Actually, one of the main reasons they didn't sign it is because there's no political incentive or political will to do it. Because even the citizens ourselves, we don't recognize that this issue exists. And online, if you look at any post that promotes the welfare of refugee, you'll find a lot of hate comments.
That's true.
Yeah, so
Yep.
we should care so that we can provide the political will for the government to also do some more progressive changes in this area. So I think that's why we should all care. Although we cannot contribute to it, we can also spread awareness. We can also encourage the community around us to help together.
Actually, I'm so glad you brought up online education. I think it's such a big conversation today because ever since COVID happened, right?
Yep.
Like a lot of us learned like a lot of things to TikTok.
Yeah.
I would say. TikTok has become our first medium of education and information. I think it's very good. I mean, if you see the way like, even the ministry is working now, there is a lot of like there's this thing called edufluencers. Have you heard of that? Edufluencers. So that influencers. Yeah, but educators. Yeah. So I would say like I'm very happy to see Malaysia's progress on how we have shifted entering teachers become content creators as well. You know?
A lot.
Yeah. So yeah, kids you're watching this, subscribe to your teachers as well. Beyond iFeel Speed or any other content creator, teachers are amazing people.
Even on TikTok, there's another like FYP just for STEM. Yeah, so I think that's actually very helpful as well for students.
True.
Utilize the online resources.
Yeah.
We didn't have it at the time.
Did we?
We had YouTube, I think.
Yeah, we did have YouTube, but then I was in the COVID era, so there was a lot of like online tuitions.
Oh.
Yeah,
They were cool, well.
I think COVID actually they brought out this side of the world. Where they said the online world we can order food.
Right. You guys did SPM during COVID. I did it the year just before COVID. Didn't experience much, guys. I'm quite old. I'm sorry.
Oh,
No, I'm not that very old, but
and you're still young.
yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, so let's move on to another question. So, to people watching this, you might feel inspired, and this is in a way raising awareness to this problem. So, what can we, or as a society do to fight education inequality?
Great question. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to break it into two parts. If you're really passionate and you have the capacity to do these things, you can volunteer at different programs that assist these things. There are like a couple of programs that we want to suggest here, like out in the open. If you're someone who just finished university and you really care about educating the kids, you could join Teach for Malaysia's fellowship program as a teacher. If you're someone who's interested in soft skill education, like whether it's debate, public speaking, and all those things, you can even just volunteer at one of our Wira-Wira Malaysia events. That's also something that we are always open for. And third, if let's say these two things are like too much commitment and it's quite tough, even under Yayasan Tunku Abdul Rahman, we have the Closing the Gap program where you could apply to be a mentor for kids under the program. These kids usually come from PPR communities. So of course, these are times where you're really committed, invested, and you really want to volunteer and feel the experience. But let's just say you really don't have capacity, which is very normal, right? I
Right.
think you're also packed today.
Yeah.
You could do simple things like this, helping through donations, charity, fundraisers. There's so many different organizations that do these things.
Yeah.
Funding this one of them allows them so much more room to do to live up and to reach that vision that they have. And I think simple things like funding, but also if you have no money, still social media posts, like spread the awareness, keep reposting it, keep sharing it. I think that just raises the awareness of people towards these areas as well.
Yeah, true. So first of all, you can contribute to a lot of NGOs other than TFM. There's also like Tutors in Action that by tutors and done by students. Project ID also has promote student leadership. So those are all NGOs that are really great in helping to empower student education and their leadership. So I think you can also contribute by joining them or not joining, just following their activities and try to promote them. Next is also you are probably wondering, you don't have the financial capability. So will the minor effect even help? Right? So for me, whatever role you're playing in this society, whatever things you're good at, you can utilize it straight away. So you're a great cook.
Okay.
You can all help in encouraging this youth adult partnership. So if you're a great cook, some students from far away from rural area or refugees who are interested in cooking may learn from you. So you're great in whatever field. You can teach that online. You can utilize the online and teach them soft skills that they can use later in their life. So education doesn't really mean just STEM and also like the technical skills that they need to acquire in life. So you can always contribute. And next is, we shouldn't feel sorry or for those that didn't acquire the the best education first place. We should just view them as equal humans before us. So next thing is also to promote awareness, to view them as humans, view them as equal as us. So communicate with them, talk to them. Don't feel sorry for them, but actually, yes, view them as our equals and just include them in this big field of education, right?
That's true.
Yeah, so I think that's what we can do. Even if they have like money to donate,
Yeah.
we can always help by knowing and acknowledging them.
Right.
Could I just add one small part that I think is important? Beyond this, the online sessions, it starts in your own classroom. If you know you're better at something, help a friend, you know? Ask people who cannot do it. Peer learning goes a long way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The small steps count, everybody.
Correct.
All right. So, education inequity isn't just a distant issue, it affects all of us because the health of our society depends on the potential of our next generation. So, if one child is denied opportunity, we all lose something. But the good news, we have the tools to change the system. So, if we choose to use them. So, thank you so much for joining us, Cyril and Hidway, on the Discovery series. So, share this episode, start a conversation, and ask yourself, what would a fairer future look like? Thank you so much and see you next time.
See you guys. Bye bye.